Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, which will be about our experiences, predominantly in the area of digital risk minimization. This webinar is acting as an introduction to some talks that we'll be giving at DIA in San Diego in about 6 weeks' time. So if you are going to be attending that, please come along to those talks. And also we will be having a stand at DIA of course, we'd love to meet you if you are able to join us. Just a brief introduction. Today's presenters are myself, Simon Ingate, and my colleague Imad Al-Dakak. Imad will give himself a full introduction a bit later on when we get to talk to his slides. So briefly, I am leading the digital risk minimization area at Huron. I've been here for 14 years, working predominantly in risk minimization program design and implementation, and a few other things such as post-authorization safety studies, which we've done a few for looking at the evaluating the effectiveness of paper-based risk minimization. For the last 10 years, we've been involved in doing things vaguely digital. So we've got quite a bit of experience in that. And in particular, for the last 5 years, we've been delivering digital applications in the area of risk minimization, risk management. Very briefly about Imad, he will do an introduction a bit later, he is a clinical epidemiologist. He's been with us for the last 4 years, and he is leading our work in the area of non-interventional studies. Some learning objectives for today. We're presenting two closely related topics. The first that I will be talking about is obviously our experience in delivering digital risk communication applications and how we've been supporting clients move from paper to digital channels so that they can engage a lot better with their healthcare professionals and patients. Imad will then present about how hybrid studies could incorporate digital and could be useful alternative ways for collecting study data, particularly in the real world. In terms of housekeeping, we will be taking answers and we'll be answering those at the end of the meeting. If you look on your device that you're using, I'm just showing mine here. There's a little Q&A at the top there, which has got questions in there. Somebody saying they have to leave at halfway through. I will answer that because you have to leave. Yes, we will recording, and there'll be a recording available after the meeting. Okay. So if you do have a question, please add it to the QA box. I've got colleagues here with me who are helping to collate those, and we will answer those at the end of the meeting. So on with the talk. In January this year, the EMA published a consultation document which outlines its initial plans for creating electronic patient information. Their approach is to make the content of what's already available in patient information leaflets in digital formats and in different ways so that they are more generally available across the European Union through things like e-health systems, and of course in all of the language that the drugs are available in across those countries. So as you can see, the EMA and other regulatory agencies are beginning to adopt digital. And although this project that they are talking about is talking about relatively routine information, sorry, I've got a technical thing going on here. We've been working for the last few years on delivering systems which provide a bit more than these sorts of things that the EMA are proposing. These are enhanced information about the safety and risk minimization of medicines for healthcare professionals and patients, which goes beyond the labeling, which can often be quite difficult to understand. So we're presenting things in a much nicer way for things. And so we've got some thoughts on where digital can go. So in terms of communication, industry, so drug companies, should be communicating with healthcare professionals and patients on a number of levels and in a format that is appropriate for the intended audiences. Safer medicines optimize their benefit-risk ratio when the correct treatment is used at the right time by the right patients. When doctors and patients are aware of risks and act on the signs and symptoms of adverse drug reactions, the impact of those risks can be minimized. So if you're aware that you have got a symptom, then you will be given instructions of what to do. Generally for patients, that is, go and talk to your doctor. Communications must encourage dialogue between healthcare professionals and patients. and to be compliant needs to be acceptable to regional and local health authorities, and of course should not be construed to be promotional. With paper, which is what everybody uses these days, there is little opportunity to actually fully engage with the stakeholders, so with the healthcare professionals and the patients. And to properly measure the impact of those paper tools, it is quite difficult. You can do some surveys, but the results tend to be quite disappointing. And this is where we feel that digital comes in. There are numerous benefits for delivering safety communications digitally. There's a nice graphic there that gives you an idea of what those sorts of things are. As you can see, you can have interactive engagement, access 24/7, and knowledge testing, for example. So content can be formatted and presented in more user-friendly ways, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. And you can use knowledge surveys so that patients or healthcare professionals can check their knowledge, and you can provide the answers back to them so they get an opportunity to learn from those knowledge surveys as well. With digital, only the latest information is ever available, and this can be accessed 24/7 in different languages and across different platforms, for example, on smartphones. Additional content such as links to adverse drug reaction reporting and links to sources of other information about the products or data collection via registries could also be included. As the tools are used, you can pick up data about their usage and understand if they're used in the way you're expecting them. If not, if, for example, you've got shortcomings in how people are using those tools or they're using them in the wrong way, corrective actions could be put into place. As an example, if you are monitoring the number of hits you're getting on a site in a certain country and you see that the hits are going down over time, particularly with doctors, you could send out your medical scientific liaison teams out to HCPs and ask them to use the tool, so encourage use. And we believe that in the future, not quite yet, because health authorities are still insisting on paper, but in the future, digital could fully replace paper. So we've been delivering risk communications as a company for more than 16 years. In the early days of risk management, we used things like paper guides for healthcare professionals and patients, and patient alert cards, and maybe a few other things to help get the message across. We've seen some companies and sometimes health authorities will provide PDFs of these materials on their websites, but those are just simply an electronic copy of the paper. A few companies have piloted websites, often in 1 or 2 enlightened countries. So that means that you might have a special thing going on in the UK or in France, but it isn't necessarily covering the whole of Europe or a whole region. What we are doing today is to help clients implement interactive digital safety platforms. These are usually a single drug, and usually they're multilingual sites covering a whole region. As you'll see a bit later, we've got a map of the world where we show where we've got some coverage. With one client, we're working on a program where we'll be developing a platform for multiple drugs. and that'll be a single platform where people will be able to go, they'll be able to log on, they'll be able to look at information about the safety of the medicines that may have been prescribed. In the future, we see new applications for digital, for example, including or linking to post-authorization safety study or post-authorization effectiveness studies, real-world data collection, and links to things like drug adherence programs. These new applications are going to be more important with some of the newer medicines, such as advanced therapies, especially in populations where in clinical trials, the populations are quite small, and the patients are going to need to be followed up for many years so that you can see that these drugs are developing, are delivering benefits over a long time. I'll run through a description of a project that we've been working with one client for in the area of immuno-oncology now. So the company we are working with, and we've been working for these guys for several years actually on various other things. They already had paper-based risk minimization materials, and they had done a PASS study to evaluate their effectiveness. The results of that study showed that the contents of the tools was appreciated and understood by the users, but the issue with the tools themselves was that dissemination and availability of the materials needed addressing. So in a discussion with PRAC in Europe, it was proposed to add to the paper materials by delivering materials digitally as well. PRAC agreed to this approach and a pilot was initiated. So what we did is we converted the paper materials into web pages. These are available in local languages across a number of countries. And one of the things we have done, which has improved the usability. So for example, we add icons or warnings in bright colors so people are aware of what things they really need to look out for. With patients is generally, if you suspect you have a side effect from this drug, contact your doctor, do not self-treat. For the healthcare professionals, in one of these tools, there was a very large set of tables talking about immune-related adverse reactions. And these are really quite complex to read and go through. So we turned that into an interactive set of tables whereby the doctor can look at the body system organ class that is being affected by the immune-related adverse reaction, and also look at the severity of that risk. And then, depending on where the thing is happening, what the level of the risk is, they can see what the proper treatment should be. So that was probably a couple of years ago now where we started doing this pilot, and then many more countries from the same company became interested in having similar sorts of things. The project has now evolved to cover 2 drugs, and they've got slightly different safety profiles, so the things are separated out into different websites for the different drugs. And we're doing this in about 35 countries worldwide now. Some of these are still being launched, but others are now live. One of the things we've done is we've enhanced the tools by adding graphics to explain the mechanism of action of the medicines and why that can lead to overactive immune systems and hence these potential adverse events. We're using things like body images for patients so they can see where some of these adverse events may affect them. For example, if your eyes go yellow, that is something you need to be worried about. The advice is always, if in doubt, talk to your doctor. We're also collecting metrics on the process measures, that is the use of the tools and information on users' understanding of the risks. That is done by these integrated surveys. But the key to the successful implementation of these applications isn't the technology. It's more about the people and the processes. So the most important thing is to get buy-in from people across the organization at a global and local level. So we've been working with people from drug safety, pharmacovigilance, regulatory, commercial, medical affairs, and legal. And we've also created a network of local market champions. And these people are really key to the success of the local implementation. I'll explain a little bit about that a bit later. So here we have a map of the world, and if you look at the countries that are colored in this sort of orangey yellow color, this is showing the current coverage of digital risk minimization tools that we have been providing our clients. As you can see, we are active practically in every continent in the world, starting from Asia and Pacific, Middle East, some parts of Africa, although that is quite new, Europe and South America and Canada. You will notice a big missing country there, which is the United States. We are working with a couple of clients where they would like to do these sorts of things in the United States as well. The reason we haven't done that before is that these sorts of educational pieces are quite often delivered through commercial websites. What the clients are seeing is that obviously that might be produced at launch, but with risk minimization, as the risk profile changes with the drug, sometimes that isn't always updated on the commercial sites. So this is why they want to sort of run these things from drug safety area. So we work with both large and medium pharmaceutical companies. Our first digital system, which is now just about in its 5th year, was done with a smaller company with a specialist medicine in a rare disease. It started as an experiment to look at the possibilities of using digital, but is now their preferred medium for the delivery of that risk minimization. And that is now available in 20 countries across the European Union. And this is the countries where the drug is marketed. We're also delivering systems covering different diseases, often related to a single drug. I mentioned the Immuno oncology product. We're also working in the area of anticoagulants and diabetes. So if a drug has risk minimization, these sorts of things can be done digitally as well. One of the things that I'll talk about in the next slide is how quickly that can be done. So if for one drug, the digital tools are being developed in parallel with the product launches. With one of our customers, we're exploring a new approach, and this will be a single source of safety information on a variety of medicines. In all these projects, we're working at people from global health headquarters and also from local markets. And one of the things that is quite important to state is that with the local people talking to their health authorities, so far, we've never had a health authority that has rejected the use of digital as a source of risk minimization. So it appears to be that lots of regulatory authorities across the world are now saying this is the way to go. If you're organized, the implementation of digital approaches can be done very efficiently. Planning and team coordination is the key to this. The initial task will be things like developing the concept and the content of the digital materials, kind of like a prototype, testing that with potential end users. That's really quite vital to ensure that what is being delivered is actually what the healthcare professionals and patients actually need, rather than what we think they might need. To ensure the smooth implementation of local market teams also need to be engaged early, and that's to keep them informed about what is planned, what's going to be happening, what they have to do to help us. So this work for them is often engaging with local health authorities, helping with content localization and planning for launches. What I mean by localization is you're taking something that would probably originally be developed in English, obviously delivering that in the right local language, but also being aware of what the health authorities may also need you to add to those tools so that they become acceptable for launch. Local champions would also quite often be asked to train their peers in maybe regulatory or marketing and medical scientific liaison, so that those people are also aware of what is happening and how they would be involved in disseminating information about the availabilities of these sites to people. Some technical activities will involve building the core digital system, localizing the content, local review and sign off. So that could be like a Mercury review or a PromoMats review. And then of course, obtaining health authority approval to actually use these things. As mentioned in the previous slide, for the diabetes drug that we were talking about, all of these activities that are shown in this graphic here were aligned with a European regulatory approval that was going on at the time, and also the local health authority reviews and launches. And so launches are fitting into a time window of around 6 to 8 months. Some of those countries are taking longer due to the fact that they're not launching until a little bit later. There are a few other considerations that need to be taken into account for the delivery of digital applications, because they are slightly different from paper in terms of their content and the way things might work. For example, if the site collects personal data, which you might do if you want healthcare professionals to log on, or use things like cookies to enhance the experience of the users, policies need to be in place and available through the applications. Now that is generally by adding a link to the tool to give them a copy of the corporate cookies policy or legal policies and those sorts of things in local language and adapted for local market. Obviously, these sorts of things are needed for compliance, for example, with the European GDPR. So in addition, as with paper-based risk minimization, sites may need to contain content showing that the site has been endorsed by the local health authority, or may need to provide things like links to local health authority adverse event reporting portals. One of the things we have seen that you sometimes get a few confusing questions from some of the reviewers. One of the things we've seen recently that one reviewer wanted the healthcare professionals to play the leading role in patient education. So that meant a very slight redesign of some of our tools. So the healthcare professional goes into their portal, they can access the patient materials, they can show the patients what is available and how to use it, and then they will provide access to those tools by giving the patients a link or a token or a card that contains a link to those materials, so the patients can then go in themselves. One of the things we found really, really useful is to help local markets prepare for meetings with their health authorities. And what they do there is they go in and they talk about the digital approach, what they're planning to do, how it will work. Obviously, if they can provide screenshots or a demonstration of a prototype, this is all really very good and helpful. And what we have found is that once the reviewers understand the approach, and that obviously this is not promotional, this is something that is very useful and is in line with what the paper-based risk minimization materials will be doing, they tend to become supporters of the digital risk communication. On one occasion, we did have a reviewer saying, why are you doing this? Because you've already got the paper stuff. So we showed them. Once we showed them what the tool did, they went, get it. Okay, do that. So people do really suddenly the lights turn on and they can appreciate what's needed, what's being done. So that is really a coverage of what we've been doing up to date. But obviously, our digital vision goes beyond where we are currently. We've been doing sort of, if you like, the two blue boxes, which is risk management and pharmacovigilance, healthcare and patient education, but we envisage moving a bit further than that. So where digital medical technologies can be provided that enhance the healthcare professional and patient dialogue. This includes things like treatment adherence, patient support. Here we'd add things like materials to help patients understand the benefits of staying on treatment, providing assistance with doing that, and how to communicate with their doctors if they feel they're in a situation where they may be considering stopping their medication. Patient support, in our view, should also be about people dealing with their disease. So that goes beyond being about drugs. It's about people living their lives and coping with their disease and also taking their medicines. Obviously, this needs to be done with care to ensure that this support is not seen as promotion. So some of the things we're looking at doing is, for example, for an oncology drug, if there are patient support groups that are independent from the drug company, one thing you might want to do is link your patients into those people who can help them with other things related to being a cancer patient. Other application using such platform could be including things like recruiting patients for clinical trials and registries and the collection of real-world evidence. The way we see this working is that these portals would act as a way into these more formal study-based tools. For example, you may need to have patient compliance and consenting as part of the tool before they get into the registry. Obviously, with some of these medicines, such as new therapeutics, where, as I said earlier, we're not quite sure what the risk-benefit profile of these are, and patients are going to need to be followed for years and years, some of these patient support systems could be used to keep track of those patients. One of the things we have seen is long-term follow-up today is covered by numerous separate programs, and digital does provide opportunities for streamlining activities. But what that will need is leadership within organizations and development of strategies involving industry and probably regulators, leading to technologies that can benefit the healthcare system by putting all these things together. I'd like to pause at this point and hand over to my colleague Imad, who's going to be discussing a new approach to study designs, which may become part of these digital innovations.
Thank you, Simon. Just as a reminder, please feel free to submit any questions you have using the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So before I start, I will quickly introduce myself. So I am an epidemiologist, been working in this space for about 14 years, and I've been with the company for about 4 years. And I look after our capabilities in non-interventional studies, which span the entire drug development cycle. In the next few slides, I will expand a little bit on the information that Simon provided. The idea here is that if we are effective in the implementation of digital risk minimization tools, in terms of having a wide reach, as well as engaged stakeholders, we can build on this success and translate it into effective evidence generation. That includes hybrid approaches. But let me take a step back and introduce these hybrid approaches. As we all know, various stakeholders, including drug developers, physicians, and payers, are increasingly using real-world evidence to measure and deliver optimal outcomes for their patients. We equally know that the drug development environment is one of finite resources, not only in terms of cost, but also in terms of time. So there's an increased need to use more time and cost-efficient approaches to generate new evidence. In recent times, we have seen the evolution of new hybrid approaches that aim to cross-link data and close those knowledge gaps. These are further enhanced by advances in technology, as well as data collection standards, which allow us to pool data coming from different sources more efficiently than we were able to do so before. The hybrid approaches that are to be discussed have numerous applications, including but not limited to post-authorization safety studies, as Simon mentioned, assessment of practice patterns, and patient outcomes. We can think of hybrid approaches in terms of design. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, we can combine primary and secondary data collection or complement a trial or a registry, which are prospective in nature, with sub-studies like those that focus on health economic outcomes, health resource utilization, or quality of life, including ePRO's electronic patient-reported outcomes. We can also think about hybrid approaches a little bit differently. With the continuously changing landscape and the pressure to generate evidence, more studies are being conducted using a combination of both traditional and non-traditional tools. For example, we are now able to recruit patients via social media or online patient communities. That obviously is could be indication specific. Not all, you cannot do that with any disease. But we can also obtain informed consents online, combine trial data with ePROs, and conduct surveys completely online. Having said that, with the influx of data sources that we've seen in recent years, we really need to be extra careful when using hybrid approaches. The overarching strategy here should be one that asks whether the research question or questions of interest really warrant the use of data from multiple sources. For example, do we combine retrospective with prospective or cross-sectional data? Or do we combine primary and secondary data? Or do we use both digital and non-digital approaches? So it's really question specific, and it has to be fit for purpose. Now I'd like to give you an example from an ongoing project that we have, just to illustrate the previous points that I noted. So in this project, the aim is to enrich electronic medical records, EMRs, which were collected previously. So in this sense, they are considered secondary data, with primary data collected in a digital form from two surveys. One is healthcare provider specific, and the other is for patients. And to summarize what we did here, the steps that we've taken to conduct this study, we started off by identifying eligible patients in the EMR database and invited them to participate. After that, patients and healthcare providers used an online platform to both register and provide consent. We then collected baseline information on patient characteristics, clinical attributes and demographics, as well as characteristics pertaining to providers from the EMR in the case of patients and the sites for the providers. Prospective information that we're gathering is being sourced through the two electronic surveys that I've mentioned, one for providers and one for patients. While that project is ongoing, we continue to assess the EMR database in order to determine if new patients can be identified and then invited to participate in the study. So the key advantages of this approach and the following is not an exhaustive list, but just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the benefits. It certainly reduces the burden of research for participants. It also provides a cross-validation of what the patient is saying versus what the physician is reporting in the medical record. And finally, it allows for the conduct of real-time data analytics just to make sure that the study is progressing as planned and to make adaptations if needed. In summary, and from our experience as a full service provider, we know that digital transformation is not only good for healthcare professionals and patients, but also for drug developers. In our view, success in this space requires effective engagement across the entire organization, as well as adopting step changes rather than big, massive changes, or what we'd like to call sudden big bangs. In addition, we need greater collaboration and openness in order to deliver meaningful digital solutions across any organization. There are numerous players in this space. In our view, the main players are the leadership, the implementation team, content managers, and IT. But like I said, there are others as well, but just wanted to tease out a couple of points pertaining in summary to those four types of players. So the global leadership is essential for setting the vision and also supporting colleagues throughout the organization. This support includes not only funding, but also time, and maybe even embedding digital innovation as a concept in job scopes. There also needs to be a core implementation team that creates all processes, SOPs, etc., and engages across the organization to ensure that people understand their responsibilities in this space, and also to communicate the change itself. Also, there's a need for both global and local resources in order to create and maintain core content that could be either for tools or other types of solutions, and also ensuring that local adaptation is efficient and compliant with all local regulations and so forth. Also, the local team could definitely provide a needed level of awareness to other folks within that market or within that local community, just to ensure that they know that these applications are there and that they are useful. Finally, technology, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, it remains an important enabler, but it should not be the main point of focus. So at the end, I would like to thank you very much for your attendance and attention, and we will now be taking questions.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to swap over again because we've got quite a lot of questions coming, and there seem to be quite a lot about the digital side of things. We have a question from Danielle Naranjo. Have these approaches been utilized within the context of clinical trials? To our awareness as of yet, not quite. Quite often, one of the things that does happen in clinical trials is some of the paper-based risk minimization tools can be used. For example, in the area of immuno-oncology, we do know that some of the materials that turned into the paper-based materials for the company that we've been working with were actually developed as part of their clinical trials program. That was to help the patients understand the risks associated with medicines and obviously be vigilant for those risks and sort of the events that could happen, and obviously be able to go back to the investigator or their doctors in order to say something's up here. But by no means does that mean that digital shouldn't be used. I think it actually should, but what that does mean is that you need to be thinking about these things a lot earlier, probably, you know, at the end of phase 1, beginning of phase 2, to say we would quite like to test some of these things. There are some emerging risks here. Well, we'd quite like to have some sort of application that will allow us to educate our healthcare professionals and patients about these and how to act on those risks. Hopefully that answers the question. The next is from somebody with another Spanish name, Ana Fernandez Serranillo. She says that some has spoken mostly about use of digital innovations for product launches. What about the use for digital for more mature products? Actually, most of the products we've worked with, the last one I did mention where everything's been coordinated with product launch, and that's because the company just had the need to do the risk minimization at the right time and came to us at the right time to do it with launch. Quite often the things that we've done so far have been converting things that are already available in paper into digital format. So obviously these things already existing. So they kind of are for not necessarily really mature products, but actually for products that have been on the market maybe a couple of years, and they've done their post-authorization safety studies to show that they need to do something a little bit better. But of course, it could be used for more mature products. I have seen there are some other questions a bit later on. Again from Anna, is about experience of using digital to support pregnancy prevention programs. if you have, did it work, and what was the feedback on use? At the moment, we haven't, but it is quite interesting. The very first risk minimization program that we were ever involved in, and this was even before I joined the company, was for a drug that had a pregnancy prevention program associated with it. It was for an acne drug, and we do know that that drug is still on the market and is still needing risk minimization. We have been talking about developing these sorts of systems where you've got some stricter controls. So what we're doing so far is education, but obviously with pregnancy prevention, you need to make sure that patients have got a pregnancy test that is negative before they should be taking their drug. In the past, we have worked on another drug, which is teratogenic, where actually the patient was not allowed to get their prescription given to them until they had a negative pregnancy test. So we do have some examples of that. But that was actually a commercial project. It wasn't anything to do with the risk minimization of things. It was more to do with the reimbursement. So we do have some experience in that. And one of the things that was very good with that project is that nobody got drug until they had obviously given their pregnancy test. We've got another question here from Douglas Roberts. It says, within the EU, how responses have healthcare practitioners been regarding the use of digital dosing calculators versus paper-based calculators? We are working on a project at the moment that has got a digital dose calculator, but that is still in the early days, so I can't really give an answer on that yet. We have seen that people are willing to use these things. One of the things to see whether that works is actually, as I said, in the development of some of these tools, is actually work with the people that you want to use these things with. So it's a case of doing some research with healthcare professionals as to, before you even develop the thing, is would they actually use it? And the other thing with dosing calculators, you do need to make sure that they don't get construed to be medical devices as well. So there's a few things you need to think about that. As you can see from the slides that we've got here, if you do have any other questions, just please send them through to myself and to Imad. I've got a couple more here as well to go through. Anna, again, is asking, with the use of digital tools, can we see whether patient outcomes are improved? I think it's early days to show that. One of the things we can do is look at knowledge as a way of whether people are understanding the education that we're trying to give them. So in most of the tools that we are developing for people, we always include knowledge surveys. And the way we get those to work is that we ask people to take part in those knowledge surveys and answer questions. And we also provide feedback based on the answers they've given. So we'll tell them what the right answer should be. So they learn as they do the test, if you like. And we're measuring, firstly, the responses that they give originally, and they can come back and do those tests at any other time. And we'll be able to see whether, assuming we are able to identify those individuals, which isn't always something that we do due to some of these data protection things, whether over time or experience with questions, whether they actually get those answers correct next time. Obviously, with surveys, you can change the questions so that they're not always the same. But at the moment, improving patient outcomes is a pretty difficult thing to do because you're looking at clinical outcomes as well, and that's one of the things that's in the GVP regulations. Is one of the things you need to look at. At the moment, I'm not so sure that that is a very easy thing to do. Also, again, sorry, Anna's asking lots of questions. I did some others as well. So, is there an opportunity for interaction with the use of the tool, and how is this managed? That's all about design of the tool. So one of the things that we've got for patients in this immuno-oncology tool is the interactivity is just things like pressing buttons and having a look at things to do with different risks, for example. One where we use a body image is you click on part of the body and it tells you what symptoms to look out for. You can imagine that you can do things that are a little bit more interactive, and things like clicking on to get more information, downloading stuff. Some of those things can be viewed, but the way that is managed is all part of the design of the tool, actually. There's some more questions. From Tanya Castanheira, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Can you expand how digitized process tracks the distribution of education materials, considering that as part of GBP, the distribution of the educational materials needs to be tracked? That is actually very, very easy. That's one of the easiest things you can do. I'll just go back a couple of slides and I'll show you something a little small. Actually, it's a bit small to see, but on this little slide here which says downloads, and on this thing that shows a graph, what those are showing actually is the effective distribution, if you like. So what happens with digital tools is that the local market, once they are ready to go live, is they will publicize the fact that these things exist. And what happens then is obviously they may send out their paper-based materials, and in there we provide links to the tools. And and what happens there is once the patient receives the link, is they'll go onto the site and we can immediately spot that the utilization of tools is going up. For one product we're currently working on, we are seeing there's about 8 countries that are launched, and we can see things like page hits. We're getting like 2,000 page hits a month on those drugs, and they've only just launched. What will happen is as they go over time, is we're expecting those sort of metrics to grow. So it's very easy to see. We can see that for healthcare professionals, we see it with patients, because they've got 2 different websites. I'm just going to hand over to, there's some question for Imad, and I'll just pass over to him.
Thank you, Simon. So I see a question here, and the question is, how are the costs of implementation of a hybrid design? So I'll answer this with 2 points. Point number 1, the cost will depend on many things, like any other study. So that would be the sample size, the number of people that you're basically conducting the study on, and or with their participation, I should say, and number of countries, and sometimes number of participating sites, etc. So the cost will always fluctuate depending on the specs that are really study dependent and more research question specific. However, having said that, in our experience, if you are to do the same study and you're comparing head to head the cost from doing a strictly traditional approach versus one where you hybridize in a way, and you hybridize, let's say, using technology, not only in terms of like I said, because the hybrid approach could be design specific, could be sometimes tools specific. So let's say you're using digital technologies, the cost head to head with the hybrid approach will certainly be cheaper in our experience. And we've done studies where we've done that, and there was a demonstrated value to the sponsor, not only in terms of price, but in terms of execution time as well. I will hand back to Simon. I think there's a question that is tool specific.
Yes, we've actually got the same question, very strangely, from 2 different people. Is Huron planning to expand into the African continent and more into the Asian subcontinent? The answer is, we can do anything you like. It's all down to where you're marketing your drugs, really. So we're working on a project which is looking at a couple of African countries, and in fact two of our clients are working in South Africa, one of them in Egypt, and then we've got a few other countries that are being lined up that we'd work with. So yes, that is an area that is not really down to us. It's down to the people that we're working with as to where they're marketing things. One of the things that's very interesting with Africa actually is that there is a very high use of mobile phone technologies, and the reason for that is they tend to use apps on their mobile phones for things like banking. So really that technology is available there. All we need to do is to get the things out to people. I thought there was another question there. Sorry, I'm just, yeah, there was a question from Luis, which is, yes, of course, yeah. What would be the answer to a health authority in case they ask us what would happen if patients don't have access to the internet? One of the things we're seeing quite a lot now, and I always talk about my father-in-law, who's actually in his mid-80s, and is based in Spain, so he's a little granddad, and he has a smartphone, he has a couple of tablets, so he is on the internet all of the time. About 5 or 10 years ago, you could probably say, you know, that would be an issue. What would you do? You obviously need to back up these things with paper. But now on, really, I think we're in a situation where digital is so available to people these days that that, you know, most people will have access to it. It might be themselves, or it might be a family member. You know, you may have a grandchild or something that can go and find information for you. So it's not saying we're not making things available for people. One of the bigger things that we need to think about is, particularly for older patients, is their ability to use some of these tools. So you may have to think about, can they see the wording on the pages? So they probably won't be able to see it on paper. So can you make the things bigger and smaller? Can you have little readers on the sites that will actually read the information to people? So digital may actually provide some advantages there. Having access, again, there may be the odd people that don't have that, and in that case we would recommend that you also back that up with things like paper, or obviously access via their doctors, for example.
Okay, there are a couple more questions here, and please, if you have any more, keep them coming. We still have some time. So one of the questions is, can you do random participant selection in hybrid studies? And the answer to that is yes, you can. So you can randomly select participants using well-established methodologies, anything like simple random sampling or stratified sampling, meaning that you select a sample of patients that is representative of different patient groups. Could be depending on age or other unique patient characteristics. Another question here. In the example that Imad gave on hybrid studies, you noted that you identified patient participants from the EMR data. Is that not a violation of patient privacy? Very good question. And the short answer is no, it's not, and I will explain why. So all studies, including this one, have to be compliant with data protection and privacy laws. In this case, the patients were identified by using an algorithm that reflected the inclusion criteria for the study. So they were then invited by the sites where they received treatment, and not by us, to participate, because they are known to the healthcare provider and the site staff as well. In these studies, and I'd expect that to be the case in most, if not all studies, patients were assigned unique ID numbers. And those unique ID numbers allow us to pull data for a given patient from the various resources that we pull data from in this study and any other hybrid study.
So thank you everybody for joining today. That was quite a lot of questions, very interesting. Thank you very much for those. If you do have other things that you'd like to ask us, obviously we've been showing our email addresses on this page for the last 10 minutes or so. And please feel free to reach out. If there's anything that we can help you with, obviously, you know, we'd love to do that. Again, come and see us if you are visiting the DIA in June. We are recording this, and the recording will be available afterwards. We do have one final question from Luis I'm going to guess from Mexico. He said, does Huron have had any experience of risk minimization activities in countries like Mexico? And the answer is yes, we do. We are currently working with one company where they are working in the whole of South America where their drug is marketed. And one of the countries that they're going for is Mexico. There are some special sort of regulations that will need to be followed in Mexico. And it's more about making sure that the site or the content of the risk minimization is approved by the authority. So what may turn out there is they'll review all the content. Not every country in South America has wanted to do that. They will review the content. They will make some suggestions for changes potentially. We may need to add some things like you do in other countries, particularly in Europe and Belgium, for example, is to say that this site has been approved by the Mexican Health Authority, and potentially some other things that need to go on there to sort of certify those. So yes, in terms of Mexico, we do have some experience. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. I think we are just about run out of time. It's been very nice talking to you today, and hopefully we'll hear from you very soon. Thank you. Goodbye.